Drew Allar has been playing like a top 10 quarterback in the country, and once again, he backed up that argument.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch. Every single day we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. My name is Zach Seyko. I'm your host of the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets. If you win that first $5 bet, just visit FanDuel.com to get started. I'd really appreciate it if you let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Be a part of the conversation. Your biggest takeaways from Penn State versus Purdue. Got to start with Drew Allar. I'm also going to talk about Tyler Warren and Penn State's defensive line being one of the best in the Big Ten, maybe even the country. But Drew Allar continues to perform at a high level. The critics have been awfully silent, and honestly for good reason, because Drew Allar is playing like a top 10 quarterback in the country. The way that Drew Allar has developed, that he just continues to get better, and he's shown it throughout the season. And then when you compare and contrast the statistics from 2024 to 2023. Okay, so most recently this performance against Purdue. 17 of 19, 247 yards, almost a 90% completion percentage, 89.5, 3 touchdowns to 0 interceptions, and honestly, kudos to the offensive line for not allowing a sack, but honestly, Drew Allar deserves credit there too because he was able to get out of those opportunities for the Purdue defensive line to take him down, and Drew Allar has become more of that complete quarterback. Talking about how he was a statue and that he had great pocket mobility a season ago, but it was what happens when he rolls out. Can he pick up those 5 to 10 yards? And yes, he's become tougher to bring down as a defender. Ask the Purdue defense. Ask the West Virginia defense. This isn't just subjected to this one game. Oh, Drew Allar had a really good game against Purdue. It's Purdue. They were 1-8 in this game. That's fine if you want to look at it that way. But Drew Allar put together one of the best performances, actually the best performance by a Penn State quarterback in 25 years statistically with that stat line. Nearly 90% of his passes completed for 3 touchdowns, no turnovers, and he added 4 carries for 22 yards. Now let's compare and contrast from 2024 to 2023. A season ago, this was abysmal for Drew. In 2023, he was completing below 60% of his passes. What? So he went from 59% to what? 62, 63, right? It was probably an incremental increase, right? 71.9. Drew Allar is completing 71.9% of his passes this season. That completion percentage is good for 5th best in the nation. The only other passers ahead of him, Haynes King of Georgia Tech, Shedeur Sanders of Colorado, Will Howard of Ohio State, and Dylan Gabriel of Oregon. That is a 12% increase compared to, so that's not 3 or 4%. This is a 12% increase from under 60% to almost 72% of his passes being completed. So he's more efficient. His decision making is better. Now you look at some other statistics. In 2024, through 10 games, 2,253 yards. Compared to last season through the regular season, 12 games. So we won't count Ole Miss. If you really want to, with that bowl game included, 2,631 yards. So I think he's easily going to break that total in the net over the next 2 games against Minnesota and Maryland. Now, the touchdown to interception ratio was better a season ago. 25 passing touchdowns to 2 interceptions. It's not bad this season. 16 touchdowns. 16 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. Now, one USC game has a lot to do with that. Had 3 interceptions in that game alone. But 1 interception against Ohio State, 1 interception against Bowling Green. Overall, over the course of 2 seasons, Drew Allar has a 45 touchdown to 7 interception ratio for his career. That is 6 touchdowns thrown for every interception. The amount of head coaches that would take that at quarterback play. So Drew Allar's more efficient, better decision making. He has dual threat ability. The jokes that he's, comparable to Lamar Jackson by James Franklin and the coaching staff. I get the irony of it, right? But Allar is tough to bring down. And now defenses, if you're not coaching them properly, he can get 5, 10, 15 yards if they really need him to. And defenses have to play a QB spy. And when they choose not to, when they want to say, hey, we don't think that Drew Allar's a threat to run here, that's when they're most vulnerable. When Drew Allar gets to take the football and keep it in his hands. So Drew Allar's done a lot of things well. He is certainly not the quarterback that he was a season ago, and he's playing like one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And that's a big reason why Penn State is at this point. Drew Allar's also keeping Penn State in games, along with, of course, the defense. Having a top 10 defense helps, but Drew Allar isn't making those mistakes. And remember, the game-winning drive that he had against USC, Allar's doing everything in his power to keep Penn State in close games. Let's go to another bright spot on the offense, and that's Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren is building a campaign for the Heisman. Not the best tight end in the country, the Heisman, because he is doing everything. Tyler Warren was the leading rusher and receiver against Purdue. And aside from the fact that he's had all these other signature performances against the likes of USC, 17 catches, 224 yards, and a touchdown. But in this game against Purdue, Purdue had no answer for him. In the backfield, as a receiver or as a running back. 11 touches, 190 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then the game against Washington, finding the end zone multiple times as well. Whatever Penn State needs him to do, throw the football, catch the football, run the football, snap the football. Travis Hunter isn't even doing that. Travis Hunter and Tyler Warren are comparable. I know what Hunter's doing. I respect his game, playing both on offense and defense as a wide receiver and a defensive back. Now, Tyler Warren isn't doing that. But I don't see Travis Hunter snapping the football. I don't see him throwing touchdown passes. I don't see him taking quarterback draws and jumping over the pile. What I'm saying is that in respect to both of their individual games, that they deserve to be in the same conversation. Travis Hunter to Colorado, Tyler Warren to Penn State provide the same similar types of value with what they can do with how dynamic of playmakers they are. So Tyler Warren continues to build his case to actually legitimately be considered for the Heisman. Do I think he will win it? It's a stretch. I would say that's not one of my most confident predictions here that would happen. But he at least needs to be in the conversation. There's reason to have him invited to New York for the ceremony and be one of the top 4, top 5 players in this conversation, especially when there isn't a quarterback that is lighting the world on fire, that is prolific, that is the face of college football to this point. Caleb Williams most recently, right? There isn't that kind of player at quarterback this season in college football. So that means that the race is wide open. Travis Hunter should certainly be considered. Ashton Genty of Boise State, Tyler Warren, and then select other players. Dylan Gabriel is going to be in the conversation for Oregon, right? But there is a case to be made for Tyler Warren beyond just, hey, he's the best. And that's crazy to think that in passing, we already know he's the best tight end in college football. We know that he's the most complete tight end in college football. What about the Heisman Trophy? So Drew Allar and Tyler Warren, big parts of why Penn State's offense is doing what it's doing and why it's so much better to go with what Andy Kotelnicki is doing as a play caller. Positive takeaways for the defense. Penn State's defensive line. Abdul Carter, Denai Dennis-Sutton, the guys in the interior are not getting enough credit and are not being recognized for how good they are. Top in the Big Ten, maybe top in the nation. We'll talk about that more on the other side of this break. And today's episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Our friends over at 5 Hour Energy know that being a passionate football fan isn't just a hobby, it's a way of life. It takes a lot of energy to power through all-day tailgates, touchdown celebrations, or that agonizing second overtime, which is why they've created the Stand the Fan 5-hour energy shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel. The energy shot made just for super fans like us, the fans who are first in the parking lot and who are the last to leave. We see you. And you know what gave me a little bit of fan fuel this week was Tyler Warren's performance, boosting what is turning into a Heisman campaign. 11 touches, 190 yards, 2 touchdowns, the leading rusher and receiver for Penn State. That's going to give you, that kind of performance is going to give you fan fuel any weekend. 5-Hour Energy knows that no matter what team you root for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're prepping for a big tailgate, ironing your jersey, your game day to-do list is a mile long. That's why the limited edition Stand the Fan 5-Hour Energy Shot is here to help keep you fueled throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with a 5-Hour Energy, available on 5hourenergy.com and shipped nationwide. And today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet just $5 and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. It's a convenient, simple setup. You just got to visit FanDuel.com to join today. And let's look over at FanDuel for the latest lines. Penn State at Minnesota. The lines are posted up on FanDuel. And Penn State is a 12.5-point favorite against the Golden Gophers, minus 530 on the money line if you're betting the Gophers, plus 390. The total is set at 45.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them over at FanDuel.com. And remember, you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Again, that's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Let's pick back up with Penn State's defense, specifically the defensive line. Might be the best in the Big Ten, one of the best in the country as well. Penn State and Ohio State are certainly battling for that top spot in the Big Ten and overall in the country. But when I look at Penn State's front four, it helps when you have Abdul Carter in this conversation. Abdul Carter has become the best edge defender in all of college football to this point. Best defensive end. If you take away those first couple of games, West Virginia, Bowling Green, where he was getting situated and used to it, the past 6 weeks, he has been the best edge defender. You look at the analytics, you look at the film, you look at the tape, it's hard to argue against it. But it's not just Abdul Carter. It's Zane Durant. It's Devon J. Thomas. It's Alonzo Ford emerging here down the stretch. Going live to react to this game at halftime, Alonzo Ford has really been a difference maker down the stretch for Penn State, because it's not just about Denai Dennis Sutton and Abdul Carter applying pressure and being really effective off the edge. It's the fact that Zane Durant and Javon J. Thomas, and now Alonzo Ford in this conversation as well, are having an impact in the interior, taking on double teams, getting pressure right up the middle, forcing quarterbacks to roll out of the pocket, and then, oh, there's Abdul Carter or Denai Dennis Sutton. And Denai Dennis Sutton has been banged up as of late, but when he was healthy, was leading the country in tackles for loss. Abdul Carter now is second in the country in tackles for loss. Really, I think the debate comes down to Ohio State and Penn State in the Big Ten, for sure. And then in the country, of course, you're going to look at Georgia. You're going to look at any of these other teams. Tennessee has one of the best defenses in the country, right? All of the Georgia, Tennessee, Penn State, Ohio State are in that conversation for the best front four in the country here. Abdul Carter is playing out of his mind. Denai Dennis Sutton, when he gets closer to 100%, he's still going to make that continuous impact. And then Zane Durant, Alonzo Ford, and Devon J. Thomas do not get enough credit, both in pass rush, but also in run defense. Penn State is a top 10 defense and a top 10 run defense because of the front four. I mean, they run a 4-2-5. So a lot of the responsibility is up front with the defensive line, and you can run a 4-2-5. You have that luxury to have an extra defensive back in there because you trust your front four so much. And Penn State's showing that they have depth to back it up too. Smith Vilbert, Amin Vanover, Keziah Izzard on the interior, and then guys like Xavier Gilliam getting into the game against Purdue, Caleb Artis on the interior of the defensive line. So Penn State has the front four. The starting front four is one of the best in the country, and then you have some pretty good depth to back it up there. So that was my biggest takeaway about the defense in terms of positives. There was that stretch where Abdul Carter just kept drawing flag after flag after flag against Purdue. There was a play that Purdue was able to complete, and Abdul Carter, it was clear as day that he was being held. He went to the referee and said, "I'm being held." And then the next few plays, he was getting a flag thrown against them because the referees were watching it and like, yeah, you're getting held, man. So the defensive line is one of Penn State's biggest strengths defensively. Let's talk about some weaknesses here. Pointed this out in the instant reaction. The tackling still has to be better. The tackling, and Alonzo Ford guilty of it. Guys in the secondary, linebackers as well. I think Kobe King missed some tackles quite a bit. Overall, you're at game 10. You really shouldn't be having this many missed tackles down the stretch. It doesn't help when your best overall tackler in KJ Winston is not there. But that's no excuse for anybody else to miss tackles in Penn State's case. It'd be nice to have him back. It would help Penn State's rating. You can go through it. If you look at Pro Football Focus, the tackle rating is not good for Penn State. KJ Winston was a big part to help with that, but now you don't have him. But just because KJ Winston's absent doesn't mean that everybody else forgets how to tackle. Penn State just needs to be more disciplined. They need to wrap up, take some better angles. I think that's another part of it. It's not only the fact that they're not wrapping up, but taking bad angles from time to time. It's game 10. I'd be a little more lenient with this after game 5 or game 6, saying, hey, it's still correctable, but these things showed up early and a little too often in the beginning of the season. And now down the stretch, okay, Purdue's not going to make you pay for that. Minnesota and Maryland probably won't either. But when you get to the college football playoff, better teams will do that. I also wasn't too impressed with third down and long and the big plays. I know what Purdue's trying to do. The long passes, right? They're just trying to get anything going. It's basically backyard football at that point when the game's out of reach, 20, 30 plus points, right? Final score being 49-10. The third and long is what gets me, is the fact that Penn State, when they are in the easiest situation, and I use the term easy lightly, but when they are in a favorable situation, how about that? A favorable situation. It's 3rd and 15. It's an obvious passing situation. And Purdue's still able to convert? That happened against Washington. That's happened against Wisconsin. That was happening a lot against Bowling Green. Right? This has been an issue, tackling and not getting off of the football field when it's 3rd and long. I understand a 3rd and 5, a 3rd and 6, where, hey, it's still manageable for the offense. If they convert here, okay. But when it's 3rd 10 and plus, and you are in an obvious passing situation and you can't help yourself out, that is an issue where better teams will make you pay. And then the big plays. Look, Purdue didn't complete a lot of passes. I think overall it was under 50%. If I can find the box score. So it was slightly under 50%. But in terms of yards per completion, I'm a huge fan of yards per play, yards per carry, yards per pass attempt, yards per completion. Well, Purdue was averaging 14 yards per completion. That is, like I said, I get what the game script had turned into for Purdue. Backyard football, see how many yards we can just pick up in big chunk plays. Penn State cycled in backups into the secondary, but that still is slightly concerning. That is slightly concerning because when you go through and break it down, going to the I looked at the Pro Football Focus box score, and you go through and it shows who was giving up the completions. Well, it wasn't all the freshman defensive backs. It was Cam Miller or Elliott Washington or A.J. Harris, right? Some, it wasn't egregious. It wasn't to a point where someone or a specific player was giving up 6 or 7 catches. Everybody seemed to have given up 2 or 3 receptions in that case. But that was the starters. That was the second string. That was the third string to that point. What I'm getting at is the long completions. I won't put too much stock into it, but I want to point it out that 14 yards per completion is a little over the top there against a Purdue team that is just not that good. They're not that good. So Penn State will figure that out. I think that they will get that cleaned up ahead of Minnesota and of course Maryland as well. I don't think that will be an issue, but if it becomes an issue, then that is bad. So that's I think Penn State's defense is in a great spot. The defensive line, the secondary, linebackers are getting reinforcements with Keon Wiley coming back from injury. He's practicing without limitations. So Penn State's defense is trending in the right direction. I'm going to highlight the good, but I also want to point out the bad to say, okay, let's not have this problem carry over into the next game. Now to finish up the show, we'll talk about how Penn State can still get a bye in the college football playoff. It is possible, and I'll tell you more on the other side of this break. And today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. You got to download the Game Time app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Game Time is a new feature. It's called Game Time Picks, and that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier than before. Game Time Picks, what does it do? It filters out all of the fluff to show you only incredible deals on incredible seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. And you can go to the Game Time app or you can go to gametime.co, and I have the tickets for Penn State at Minnesota pulled up in front of me, and all of the top deals on Game Time are right there listed in front of me. You can get a super deal at an 11% discount as well on Game Time. Upper sideline, these are 50-yard line seats, section 210, row 24, all in pricing, so there's no surprise fees at checkout, $99 per ticket. If you're just looking for the lowest price tickets, upper corner, section 205, row 32, $45 a piece. That's all in pricing. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Let's talk about the fact that Penn State can still get into the Big Ten championship game, win the Big Ten championship game, and get a bye in the college football playoff. So for anybody that doesn't know, the college football playoff is taking the 4 champions of the Power 4 conferences, and they get the bye. Doesn't matter what your record is. You could be Oregon, hypothetically remain undefeated, go 13-0, get the number 1 seed, or you could be a 4-loss team in the Big 12 and get the number 4 seed most likely. I don't necessarily agree with that, but Penn State has a path, has an avenue to do it. How does that happen? Well, Penn State, in order to get to the Big Ten championship, they need one of two things to happen. A, you need Ohio State to lose to Michigan. You need them to defeat Indiana, and then you need them to lose to Michigan. And Penn State, of course, Penn State needs to win out in these scenarios. There's no scenario where they go 10-2. They're out of the college football playoff. They lose to Minnesota or Maryland. They are out of the college football playoff conversation here. For Penn State, winning out and then scoreboard watching and having Ohio State defeat Indiana, and then they lose to Michigan. And then there's a second avenue for Penn State to get into the Big Ten championship game. Instead of a far-fetched loss for Ohio State to Michigan, it would be an upset loss by Oregon to Washington. And based on the tiebreaker that Penn State defeated Washington and Oregon hypothetically did not, Ohio State and Penn State would get into the Big Ten championship game if that would happen. So that's the simplicity of it. It's far-fetched, but it's simple here. Ohio State has to beat Indiana and then lose to Michigan, or Ohio State has to beat Indiana, and then Washington has to defeat Oregon. Penn State would have the tiebreakers and get into the Big Ten championship game, and then anything's possible, right? Oregon versus Penn State or Ohio State versus Penn State, yes, they would be the underdog, but it's not like they would be a touchdown or a 10 or a double-digit underdog. Penn State would most likely be a 3 or a 4-point underdog in that game, whether it was Oregon or Ohio State. And Oregon looks just as human as everybody else. Penn State went out to Madison, Wisconsin, and won 28-13 with its backup quarterback. Oregon went out to Madison, Wisconsin, and honestly probably should have lost. If Braden Locke didn't have the worst game of his career, Wisconsin's quarterback, Oregon probably loses that game. That was 16-13. Dan Lanning called a fake field goal, fake punt towards the end of the game, and Wisconsin gets the ball back and throws an interception for that game-winning drive, a game-losing drive in that case. So Penn State does still have, is it realistic? Most likely not. Is it possible? Yes. It's the game. Michigan to salvage its season. Sharon Moore to prove a point that he belongs there as the head coach is going to try his hardest to beat Ohio State. And then Washington and Oregon is still a rivalry that's carried over. Those were the two schools that came together. It was USC and UCLA, Oregon and Washington coming over to the Big Ten. That game means something to Washington, kind of the same thing as Sharon Moore. Jed Fish needs to prove that he belongs at Washington, that he can coach against Big Ten level competition. So it is not impossible. It is unlikely, but Penn State can still get a bye as long as they get into the Big Ten championship and then win that game. Penn State is a 12.5-point favorite against Minnesota. I like Penn State's chances in that game. I know it's the road environment. I know Penn State's lost out there before. It was 2019. That was a Sean Clifford-led team. First year of him starting. Completely different team. I think I would hope that James Franklin has learned his lesson. But I like the way that the matchup is. I think Penn State will be able to take care of business against Minnesota. Just win out. Penn State is in control of its own destiny. Win out, you get a home football playoff game. And then if things break in your favor, absolute chaos down the stretch for the Big Ten, Penn State could find itself in the championship game and in position to get a bye, not even have the home football playoff game, which is crazy to think about. But Penn State in the Big Ten championship, it is possible. I really appreciate each and every one of you for checking out this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Be a part of the conversation. Really appreciate it if you left a like on this show. And if you're not already, become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams. And again, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. Now, for your second listen and watch, you got to check out Locked On Big Ten, the podcast devoted to the Big Ten Conference. Craig Sheeman puts the Big Ten first when everyone else overlooks it. SEC bias is a real thing. You can find Locked On Big Ten available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And it's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.